Okay, today's lesson is on the U.S. Constitution. We're going to be going through foundations, ideas, parts to get you to understand just what our founding document actually looks like. I'm going to need you to take a few minutes and write these essential questions down for your notes. You can stop the video or pause the video so that you can have a chance to make sure you understand that you're looking for what actually led to the Constitutional Convention. We covered that in previous lessons. Talk to me about the event and then, what that event did. You're going to look at how the preamble lays out the goals of our new government. What are the 7 articles that make up the Constitution? And then finally, explain the foundational ideas, which are different than the preamble. So you're going to need to be answering these as you go through the notes. We'll go over them at the end of the lesson. Now, the Constitutional Convention, May 14th, 1787 until September 17th, 1787. Shays' Rebellion really was your impetus at that point, exposing inherent weaknesses in our government. The government wasn't able to regulate trade between the states. It wasn't able to kind of create a uniformity for our country in how states were going to deal with each other. Certain states were taxing others. Certain states were stopping trade. So it really became different. 13 different currencies was causing inflation. Money was becoming worthless at this point in time. So there was a lot of things going on when the Constitutional Convention finally rolled around in Philadelphia in May. The goal of the articles was to revise the Articles of Confederation. They knew there were imperfections. There were state bills of rights. There was really no relative requirements on how people would or states would relate to each other. Strong legislature really didn't exist. There was no enforcement issues. The goal, when they were going to revise the articles, of course, was to balance the strong national government need, but also not threaten the liberty of individuals. So how do you create order yet not create tyranny? The Constitution, an amazing document, very adaptable, flexible, provides structure and organization, but it doesn't create so much structure that it becomes a tyrannical system. So we're going to look at the big issues that occurred at the convention that the founding fathers really had to talk about. There were a lot of things that occurred, a lot of things that didn't occur, and it was very important for them to try to get this right. Did they get it right? Oh, absolutely not. The Constitution has been amended 17 times since the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was one big unit, and then 17 times after that. So no, it wasn't perfect. We've made changes. And we'll continue to make changes as we go along. Now, the key word in the Constitutional Convention was, of course, compromise. Lots of compromises. Abraham Lincoln once called this Constitution, a giant bundle of compromises. Well, he was right. The first and most well-known compromise, of course, was called the Connecticut Compromise. It's also called the Great Compromise, which was a compilation of the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. The Virginia Plan, of course, based on big state populations. It was bicameral, 3 branches, kind of like what we're looking at today. The New Jersey Plan, based on equality, it was unicameral, still had 3 branches, but only 1 unit of Congress. The compromise, of course, took the bicameral concept from the Virginia Plan, created the House and Senate. The House based on population, the Senate based on equality, kind of a combination of the Virginia and the New Jersey plans. Who benefits more from this? Big states or little states? That's kind of up for interpretation. It all depends on the scenario you're looking at. If you're looking at taxes, the big states pay more. If you're looking at the Electoral College, the little states have a bit more influence. Senators little states, I mean, a little tiny state like Rhode Island still has the exact same reputation in the Senate as a large state like California. So you have big questions about who benefits more. The Three-Fifths Compromise was put in place to try to settle the issue of the slave population, with each slave counting as three-fifths of a person, or 60%, for representation purposes. The commerce and slave trade came in as a nod to the southern states to get them to ratify the Constitution, restricting any action on slavery for 20 years. Congress could regulate trade but couldn't tax exports. Cotton was a big export at this time in the South. So we're going through. There were a whole bunch of other compromises. These are the two biggies. But I mean, the Electoral College itself was a compromise. How are we going to elect the president? There were many compromises that were happening and that were completed to create this document. Now, the preamble. This is the basic philosophy. These words that start out our government: to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. You all remember the Schoolhouse Rock preamble song? Well, what do those things really mean? To form a more perfect union, were we, telling Europe that we were going to be better than them? What were we saying? Well, to form a more perfect union meant we are going to make our country better and stronger. Make it work better for the people. Establishing justice was creating fair and impartial laws, not one law for the rich and one law for the poor, or one law for the nobles and one law for the peasants. We were going to make everything fair. Ensure domestic tranquility meant we were going to work at controlling factions, groups of people fighting each other over limited resources. We were going to work to control that. We were going to defend our nation against all enemies. We're looking at you, Great Britain. We're also looking at Spain. We're also looking at anyone who might give our nation problems in the future. Promote the general welfare. We're going to create a government that served the people, not the other way around. And we were going to secure our freedoms and our rights, not only for the current population, but for generations to come. This was the philosophy that was behind what was written on that document by our founding fathers. Now, the Constitution is a very simple document. In fact, it's one of the smallest constitutions of any country in the world. It's about 7,000 words total. It can be read in about 30 minutes if you can get past all the language from the late 1700s. The first three articles, of course, create our three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judiciary. Everyone kind of knows those. We start to move on. Article 4 is the relations among the states. How are the states going to play together? They're going to play nice. Article 5 is all about how you're going to amend the Constitution. If you remember from an earlier lesson, trying to amend the Articles of Confederation was almost impossible. You needed all 13 states to agree, and that never happened. Article 6, what was the role of the national government? This is where you're going to find the Supremacy Clause. Very important, showing that once this Constitution is ratified, it will become our national government. And finally, Article 7 was how to ratify this Constitution, what the states needed to do to get this ratified, how the votes were going to happen within Congress. Now, the basic principles of democracy in our country that our Constitution is founded on: well, popular sovereignty. All power flows from the people. Limited government. Even the federal government, even the state governments, the local governments are all expected to follow what is set out in the Constitution. No one is above the law, not even the government itself. Separation of powers. We're going to give each section of the government, each branch, its own separate powers, and that is what it is in charge of. Checks and balances. Well, each of those branch, not only do they have their own separate powers, they have the power to check other branches to make sure no one gets too big. And that's our balance section. Judicial review. which gives the Supreme Court the ability to be the final arbiter of just what the Constitution means, and federalism. Now, separation of powers is kind of a horizontal check where the three branches of government check each other, while federalism is more of a vertical check. The states have powers given to them through the Constitution and the 10th Amendment so that they can check what the federal government is doing. So we have vertical checks too in federalism. Now, popular sovereignty starts out our preamble, we the people. Be heard, voting. There's also limits on what can happen. So you have to make sure you understand your vote is your voice. You need to be heard. Things you can and cannot do based on we as a government. We are the source of power. We created the national government. We give it power. It's going to guarantee us a republic, which means we can vote for our representatives and we can make sure that the government does what we say. Now, limits on our democracy. Well, the Electoral College is a limit. We don't vote for president. We actually vote for the guys who vote for the guys running for office. We originally didn't vote for senators. They were selected by state legislatures until the 17th Amendment. And we limit terms, 6 years, 2 years for the House members. So there are limits. Now, limited government. Lots of things our government is limited. They must follow rule of law. Habeas corpus, which is Latin for have the body. They can't throw you in jail forever without telling you what your crime is and trying you. Ex post facto laws, making laws or making something a crime after you committed it to arrest you. Majority rule, but recognizing minority rights. These are all very important in our country. The concept of compromise, protecting the minorities, protecting us from abuse is all very important in the democratic system. Checks and balances, separation of powers, those foundational things. Excuse me. You see this political cartoon talking about Richard Nixon feeling that he didn't need to follow the rules because he was president. Well, in our country, even the president must obey the law. Richard Nixon found that out when he was about to be impeached. He ended up resigning so that he would not be impeached. Now, separation of powers. There you see separation of powers. The three branches, all separate, co-equal branches. They share power. They share different powers, and they can check each other. The goal is to limit government. The founders designed our government to be inefficient, to be fragmented, to slow everything down. If you want to get stuff done fast, folks, tyranny's the way to go. If you want to make it limited and safe, you want to be inefficient. Our government does that. Here's your separation of powers again, but when it comes, there are your checks and balances. You can see them, who can do what to who. As you can see, Congress has the most checks, executive branch following, and finally the judicial branch with the least amount of checks. Separation of powers, it's just a cute cartoon I thought you'd love to see. Many people are really disheartened by the way our government is working now and would like to see them out of office. Don't think they're understanding just what separation of powers means, but it was cute. Now, here's your checks and balances. Your checks and balances can be seen earlier in that other slide. But we look at, just because Congress loves a bill, president can still say no. There's your check. Congress and the president can love a law. Judicial branch, Supreme Court can say, nope, unconstitutional. So we have a lot of these. Each branch is allowed to limit them. No branch becomes too powerful, and there we have our limited governments. Once again, here's another just graphic of the checks and balances that is occurring within our nation as we speak. Now, the six principles of democracy, finally, judicial review. There you are. It is the court's job to determine the constitutionality of laws. They are the final arbiter. This comes from Marbury versus Madison in 1803, when they decided that if it's the judicial branch's job to interpret the law, then that means it is also their job to determine if that law can be interpreted to violate the Constitution. Federalism is our last principle of democracy, talking about not only is government shared horizontally at the federal level, but also vertically between the federal and the state governmental units, coming from the 10th Amendment, where the powers that are not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to states are reserved for the states. We refer to this as Marble Cape federalism. As you can see, the national government very much at the top, the state government at the bottom. There are interactions in the middle, like taxation. Those are roles that are shared. I kind of look at that as the icing in the middle of the layers. There's other kinds of federalism. We'll go into that in the next chapter, which can get a little bit more squirrely when we're talking about who has what powers and when. All right, our essential questions, folks. That final push, you got it. Shays' Rebellion. It unmasked the weaknesses of the Articles to regulate the states, began to provide more of a cohesive set of rules to unite the nation. That's what the founders were looking for. Question 2, talking about the preamble. Know those 6 goals based on the language of the preamble, making our country strong and fair, and protecting ourselves and securing our freedoms. 3, those 7 articles, make sure you understand the structure of the Constitution. Those 7 articles. We'll be doing an assignment later in the week to understand that even more. And finally, here's our foundational ideas: popular sovereignty, limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial review, and federalism. Please make sure that you're familiar with these terms, as you will be tested on them later in the week. Hey guys, have a great day. Thank you.